Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Today, we're diving into the myths surrounding a woman whose name was whispered in fear. Bellatrix Lestrange. One of the most terrifying and vivid figures in the wizarding world is far more complex than she first appears. I invite you on a journey to the darker side of magic, where fanatic devotion, hidden pain, and madness intertwine into a single, haunting image. Number 1. Bellatrix was not insane. Yes, her eyes blazed with fanatic fire, and her laughter could shatter the silence like breaking glass. But that's what makes her so terrifying. She hadn't lost her mind. Every act she committed, she did knowingly, with intent. Her loyalty to Voldemort was absolute. Not out of fear or coercion, but from the heart. She didn't just follow the Dark Lord. She believed in him, in his vision, his power, his mission, and that's what made her one of the most fearsome of the Death Eaters. Number 2, she was a masterful fighter. Bellatrix is often lumped together with the rest of the Death Eaters, many of whom were easily defeated or fled from battle, but she was something else entirely. In the books, she fought Hermione, Ginny, and Luna all at once and held her ground. These were seasoned fighters. Bellatrix wasn't just a madwoman waving a wand, she was a deadly duelist, calm, swift, and lethal. Number 3, she was no beauty. In the films, Helena Bonham Carter brought a wild charisma to Bellatrix, but in the books, her appearance told a much darker story. 15 years in Azkaban left scars. Once a beautiful woman from a noble house, Bellatrix was worn down by isolation, dementors, and prison rations. Her face became gaunt, almost corpse-like. Her beauty faded, replaced by a sinister aura that chilled the blood. Number 4, she had a daughter. For those familiar only with the original books and films, this may come as a shock. Bellatrix had a child, Delphi. Yes, the mysterious girl from the Cursed Child. Officially, she's the daughter of Bellatrix and Voldemort, born sometime between the events of Order of the Phoenix and Half-Blood Prince. Her very existence was a final, chilling act of Bellatrix's devotion to her master. Number 5, a woman among men. The Death Eaters were overwhelmingly a boys' club. Few women bore the mark, Alecto Caro being one of the rare exceptions. Bellatrix wasn't just one of the few. She was elite. Her sister Narcissa never formally joined, and no other woman commanded the same presence. Bellatrix carved out her place through blood and loyalty, not privilege. She earned her power in a world where women were rarely welcomed, and she did so without mercy. Number 6. Voldemort wasn't her only attachment. Yes, her love for the Dark Lord was fierce and tragic. She lived for him, breathed for him, suffered for him. But one strange detail offers a rare glimpse of another side. Creature, the Black family's house elf, kept a portrait of Bellatrix by his bedside. The same elf who despised most others held onto her image. Why? Because she had shown him kindness, perhaps not love in the traditional sense, but something close. Proof that even in her darkness, she was capable of other emotions. Number 7, she knew Voldemort's bloodline and didn't care. Tom Riddle was a half-blood, his father a Muggle. That alone undermines the very ideology he preached, but Bellatrix knew and never flinched. Her loyalty and fanaticism eclipsed such trivialities. She didn't worship his heritage, she revered what he became. His twisted, serpentine face, born of dark transformation, didn't repel her. It drew her in even deeper. Number 8. She didn't attend school with Snape. Many assume Bellatrix and Severus Snape were classmates, both Slytherins, both Death Eaters. But timelines tell a different story. Bellatrix was born in 1951, meaning she left Hogwarts long before Snape began his first year in 1971. They may have crossed paths later among the Death Eaters, but in school their worlds never overlapped. Number 1, she is not insane. Number 2, she is skilled in combat. Number 3, she is not that beautiful. Number 4, she has children. Number 5, she is one of the few female Death Eaters. Number 6, Voldemort is not her only love. Number 7, she didn't care about Voldemort's blood status. Number 8, she wasn't Snape's classmate. Number 9, Bellatrix never repented for her crimes. Bellatrix Lestrange never felt sorry. Not once. Not for the screams, not for the blood, not for the lives she shattered. She believed in every curse she cast. Some fans hope she had a final moment of regret, a flicker of doubt, a whisper of guilt. But no, that moment never came. Bellatrix didn't die sad. She died smiling. She was proud of her crimes, proud. She tortured the Longbottoms into madness, for loyalty, for pleasure. In court, she shouted, "The Dark Lord will rise again!" No tears, no shame, only fire in her voice. Even in her last battle, nothing changed. She fought Molly Weasley with laughter on her lips, taunting, dancing. "What will happen to your children when I've killed you?" she spat. Her eyes were alive. Her soul was dark. She thought she was winning. She didn't beg when she lost, didn't scream, didn't run. Molly's curse hit her, and that was it. Shock, silence, gone. But even in death she looked defiant. There's no sign of doubt in her story, no crack in her mask, no hidden heart. Bellatrix didn't fake her cruelty. She was cruelty, pure and proud. She didn't fall into evil, she chose it, and she loved every second of it. Number 10. Bellatrix was not a typical Azkaban prisoner. Bellatrix Lestrange wasn't a prisoner. She was a fanatic in a cage. And Azkaban couldn't touch her. Others broke, cried, went mad in silence. The Dementors fed on their memories until nothing was left. But Bellatrix? She endured, not just endured, thrived. Her mind stayed sharp. Her loyalty never cracked. She didn't scream in court. She declared, "The Dark Lord will rise again. Throw us into Azkaban, we will wait." Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes burned. She wore her sentence like a badge. Years later, when she escaped, she looked half dead. Hollow cheeks, shadowed eyes, but her grin was real. Her pride untouched. She hadn't betrayed him. That was all that mattered. She didn't see Azkaban as punishment. She saw it as proof of faith, of strength. She had waited, survived, believed. While others collapsed, Bellatrix whispered his name in the dark. When Voldemort returned, she didn't hesitate. She stepped from the shadows and knelt. "Master!" One word, and it said everything. She was ready, still his. Always his. Bellatrix wasn't just different. She was terrifying. Not because Azkaban broke her, but because it couldn't. Number 11. Bellatrix did not respect Severus Snape. Bellatrix Lestrange didn't respect Severus Snape, not for a second, not when he bowed, not when he bled, not even when the Dark Lord praised him. To her, Snape was a fraud. She never hid it. In The Half-Blood Prince, she snapped, "Where were you when the Dark Lord fell?" Her tone was sharp, her eyes burning. She didn't ask, she accused. Every word was a blade. She wanted blood. Snape answered with ice, calm, precise. But Bellatrix wasn't impressed. "Why didn't you go looking for him?" she hissed, her voice cracked with fury. She didn't believe in second chances. She wanted him exposed. Even when Voldemort accepted Snape, Bellatrix didn't flinch. She followed orders but never trusted him. Her loyalty was all-consuming. She expected the same from others. Snape? He was too quiet, too clever, too cold. She hated that, hated his stillness, hated the way he looked at her like she was noise. Bellatrix wanted screams, fire, devotion. Snape gave none of it. Narcissa trusted him. She begged him to help Draco. But Bellatrix watched, silent, cold. When Snape made the unbreakable vow, her lips didn't move. No smile, no nod. She didn't believe him. She never let down her guard. In every room, every meeting, her eyes flicked to him, her hand close to her wand, always ready, just in case. To her, he wasn't one of them, not truly. He wore the mark, yes, but he didn't feel it, didn't live for it. He didn't love the Dark Lord, and Bellatrix could smell that. She craved passion, fanaticism, obsession. Snape had none. He was a shadow, a whisper. And that made him dangerous, but not worthy. She never said it, never needed to. You could see it in her eyes. Bellatrix Lestrange trusted no one she couldn't predict. And Snape? He was a riddle she refused to solve. Number 12, Lestrange was not her birth surname. Before she was Lestrange, she was Black. Bellatrix Black, born of fire and blood, the eldest daughter of Cygnus and Druella, sister to Narcissa, sister to Andromeda, but above all, heir to a name that ruled the pure-blood world. The name Black was more than a family. It was a dynasty. Cold, proud, ruthless. Bellatrix didn't just carry the name, she wore it like armor. Every word she spoke dripped with superiority. Every curse, every sneer came from that place. She never let go of it. Even after marrying Rodolphus Lestrange, legally, yes, she became Bellatrix Lestrange, but in her heart, she never stopped being a Black. The Lestranges were tools, the Blacks were royalty. When Andromeda married a Muggle-born, Bellatrix didn't mourn. She erased. "She is no sister of mine," she hissed. Her voice didn't shake, her heart didn't ache. She saw blood traitors as worse than enemies. They were betrayals carved from within. Sirius felt it too. In Order of the Phoenix, he spit her name like poison. "You're not just a murderer, you're a Black." He knew, and she didn't deny it. She smiled, because deep down she believed it made her better, purer, stronger. She didn't fight for Rodolphus. She didn't whisper his name. She fought for blood, for legacy, for the twisted pride passed down by the House of Black. Voldemort wasn't her first master. Her first master was her family's belief in magical superiority. Even her fury came from blood. When she killed Sirius, it wasn't just murder, it was cleansing. He had turned his back on the name. She turned her wand on him without hesitation. It was personal. Her voice, her stare, the way she walked, none of that came from Voldemort. It came from drawing rooms soaked in pride and fire whiskey, from ancestors in silver frames.
Number 13, she was not afraid of death.
Bellatrix. Lestrange didn't fear death. She flirted with it, danced around it like an old friend. While others ducked and shielded, she charged, smiling, laughing, daring death to come closer. People call her a coward, say she clung to Voldemort like a frightened child, but they didn't see her fight. They didn't see her at Hogwarts. In that final battle, she was fire unleashed. Bellatrix didn't hide. She hunted. She faced Kingsley Shacklebolt, Hermione Granger, Ginny Weasley all at once. 3 skilled duelists, each with something to lose. Bellatrix had nothing, no fear, no hesitation. She laughed as spells screamed past her. Pain didn't stop her. Fear didn't slow her. She moved like someone who had already made peace with death. Her only goal? Please him. Voldemort, her master, her obsession. Dying for him would have been a gift. Then came Molly Weasley. A mother in mourning. Bellatrix didn't flinch. She taunted her. "What will happen to your children when I've killed you?" she hissed. She didn't expect to lose. Not to a woman like Molly. Even as Molly's magic struck hard, Bellatrix didn't back away. She smirked, dodged, spun. She thought it was a game. She thought she was winning, right up until the curse hit. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth froze. And just like that, gone. No scream, no plea, no mercy. Bellatrix Lestrange died with surprise on her face, not fear. She never asked for help, never called for Voldemort. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted to destroy or burn trying. That was her nature. All or nothing. Others fought to survive. Bellatrix fought to serve. Her loyalty was madness, pure, cold, unstoppable. She feared only one thing, failing him.
And that made her the most dangerous kind of enemy, the kind who doesn't care if she dies.
Number 14, she was not a loyal wife. Bellatrix Lestrange had a husband, but she was never a wife. Not really. Rodolphus Lestrange stood beside her, yes, fought with her, went to prison with her. But she never saw him, never chose him. He was a name, a shadow, nothing more. Their marriage wasn't love, it was legacy. A union between the Black and Lestrange families, two ancient houses, two pure bloodlines. It was duty dressed as romance. Bellatrix didn't care. She wanted power, not partnership. And Rodolphus? He accepted it. Quiet, dull, forgotten. She gave her heart to someone else, Lord Voldemort, not in secret, not with shame. She worshipped him openly. Her eyes lit up when she spoke his name, not her husband's, never. In the books, Snape says, the Dark Lord is pleased with Bellatrix. And that was enough. She lived for that approval. It was her fuel, her drug. She never screamed for Rodolphus, she screamed for him. In the Department of Mysteries, when things fell apart, she didn't call her husband. She shrieked, "Master, I tried!" Desperate, pleading, like a lover begging not to be abandoned. It was madness, but it was real. Rodolphus never protested, never pushed back. He knew, everyone did, Bellatrix wasn't his. She belonged to the Dark Lord. She kneeled before him like before a god. Her voice softened when she spoke to him. Her eyes burned. It was obsession, twisted, unshakable. Even when Voldemort gave her nothing, she clung to him. No affection, no warmth. He barely acknowledged her. Still she stayed loyal. When Harry broke into her vault, she panicked, not for gold, not for Rodolphus, but for his trust. "What if the Dark Lord thinks it was me?" she cried, terrified. Broken, she never feared losing her husband. She feared losing her master. Number 15, her wand was never unique. Bellatrix Lestrange's wand looked deadly, twisted, dark, like it had a soul of its own. Fans still whisper that it held special powers, something cursed, something wicked. But they're wrong. Her wand wasn't unique. It wasn't ancient or forbidden. It was walnut with a dragon heartstring core, a common pairing in the world of magic. It didn't hum with dark energy. It didn't choose her because of evil. It chose her because she was strong, determined, unshakably loyal to darkness. Walnut wands go to those who are clever and firm in their beliefs. Bellatrix fit perfectly, but that's it. The wand had no secret, no legend. J.K. Rowling, never hinted it was special. No hidden magic, no cursed history, just wood, just dragon heartstring. It wasn't the wand that made her terrifying, it was her. And she used it like an artist uses a brush. Or a butcher, a knife. She carved screams out of people. Hermione Granger felt it. In Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix used the Cruciatus curse with the calm of a painter, adding strokes to a canvas. Hermione writhed, cried. But Bellatrix smiled. The wand obeyed because she demanded it. It didn't glow, it didn't whisper, it didn't care. When Harry disarmed her, it flew from her hand like any other wand. No curse, no fire, no drama. It was weightless without her grip. People love to give power to objects. They want the wand to be evil too. But the truth is colder. This wand was just a tool. Evil came from the hand that held it. Bellatrix didn't need a cursed wand. She was the curse. Number 16, she didn't always hate muggles. Bellatrix Lestrange was not always the embodiment of hatred and madness the wizarding world came to know. Her loathing of muggles, so intense and fanatical in her later years, was not something she was born with. It was a slow fire, stoked by years of ideology, carefully tended by the voices she chose to listen to and those who demanded her loyalty. Before the madness, before Azkaban, before the Dark Lord carved himself into her soul, there was a girl named Bellatrix Black. She grew up within the ancient and noble House of Black, a family known for its pure blood pride. Yet even the Blacks were not monolithic in their beliefs. Her cousin Sirius, her aunt Andromeda, rebels in their own ways, proved that the house was not uniformly cruel. Bellatrix, as a child, was curious, intelligent, and fiercely ambitious. These traits, if directed differently, could have made her a heroine. But the drawing rooms of Black Manor whispered of bloodlines and sacred heritage, and it was in those whispers that her story began to twist. In her youth, Bellatrix was close to her sisters, Narcissa and Andromeda. While Narcissa accepted the expectations placed upon them with quiet elegance, and Andromeda questioned them with silent rebellion, Bellatrix was the loud one, the dramatic, the fiery, the one who wanted to be seen. And at 11, when she received her Hogwarts letter, she was ecstatic, not just because she would attend the prestigious school, but because it gave her a chance to prove her worth. At Hogwarts, she was sorted into Slytherin, as everyone expected, but even in the green and silver common room, things weren't as black and white as the family tapestry made it seem. Bellatrix shared a dormitory with students of varying backgrounds. She wasn't openly cruel, not yet. In fact, one of her first true conversations at school was with a half-blood girl in her potions class. The girl, Marlene Whitmore, had a quick wit and didn't flinch at Bellatrix's sharp tongue. For a time, they studied together in the library. Bellatrix never spoke of it to her family. But things changed, slowly, not all at once. It began with the books, dark ones, old ones, passed around among older Slytherins who laughed at the ministry and spoke of purity like it was religion. Blood remembers, they would say. It's in your veins and it's in your power. Bellatrix drank it in like it was scripture. She wanted to be special, different. She began to pull away from Marlene. Her words sharpened, her laughter turned cruel. During her 5th year, she witnessed her cousin Sirius being sorted into Gryffindor, a disgrace, according to the family. The look of betrayal in her eyes was sharp and real. "He's a traitor," she whispered to Narcissa that night in the dormitory. "He'll shame us all." It wasn't anger at Sirius, not really. It was fear. If he could turn his back on their legacy, could she? But the moment that marked her turn came in her 6th year. There was a duel. Not in the open, not in a classroom. in a hidden corridor behind the tapestry of Bran the Bloodthirsty. Marlene had defended a Muggle-born student who had been hexed by a group of older Slytherins. Bellatrix was there. She didn't cast the first spell, she watched, and then when Marlene tried to protect the younger girl, Bellatrix struck, not out of hate, but out of confusion. She wanted to prove she wasn't soft. She wanted to belong. After the duel, Marlene avoided her. Bellatrix felt something like grief, but she buried it deep under sarcasm and scorn. "Mudblood lover," she sneered once in the hallway. And the look Marlene gave her, wounded, quiet, and furious, never left Bellatrix's mind. When she graduated Hogwarts, she was already entangled in a new web. The whispers had become voices, and the voices had a name: Lord Voldemort. He was charismatic, mysterious, and spoke to her hunger for greatness. "We are better," he told her, his voice soft and venomous. "We are the future." She listened, she obeyed, and she believed. Her marriage to Rodolphus Lestrange was one of convenience, two pure blood lines joined for legacy. But her heart, if it still belonged to anyone, now belonged to Voldemort. He became her obsession, not just as a leader, but as a symbol. He gave her a cause, a purpose. "The Muggles are filth," he'd say. "They pollute what we are. You, Bellatrix, are meant to cleanse the world." And she believed him because she needed to. In Order of the Phoenix, Sirius tells Harry, she's a true believer. He says it not with anger, but with pity. He knew her once. Perhaps he remembered her laughter as a child. The way she used to sing in the drawing room before their parents poisoned their minds. He remembered the girl who wasn't yet lost. Years later, when Bellatrix tortured the Longbottoms into madness, her fanaticism was complete. She laughed in the courtroom. "The Dark Lord will rise again," she cried. "You'll see." But even then, behind the madness in her eyes, there was something more. Desperation. She needed it to be true, because if it wasn't, everything she had done, everyone she had hurt, would have been for nothing. In Half-Blood Prince, when Narcissa begs Snape to protect Draco, Bellatrix hisses, "You dare speak to me of loyalty?" She is a woman who has given everything, her family, her freedom, her soul, for the cause. But it was never really about Muggles. It was about control, about identity, about being needed. Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are far more than our abilities." Bellatrix had the ability to be brilliant, even kind, but her choices led her into shadow, and she chose to stay there. Number 17. Bellatrix never sought leadership among the Death Eaters. Of all the followers who once knelt before Lord Voldemort, few inspired as much fear and fascination as Bellatrix Lestrange. Her devotion to the Dark Lord was not merely fanatical, it was all-consuming. While others among the Death Eaters jockeyed for power, whispered in corners, and envisioned themselves leading in Voldemort's absence, Bellatrix never did. Unlike Lucius Malfoy, who flaunted status and carefully maintained political connections, or Severus Snape, whose loyalties were an intricate tapestry of deception, Bellatrix cared nothing for strategy or self-preservation. She had no use for subtlety. Her desire was singular, to serve. This is what makes her so distinct among Voldemort's inner circle. Many fans have speculated that Bellatrix had aspirations of leadership, of one day becoming the most powerful Death Eater, second only to the Dark Lord himself, or perhaps even replacing him. But that fantasy doesn't align with her reality. Power, in the sense of dominion over others or command of the ranks, was not her motivation. What Bellatrix craved was proximity. She wanted to be near Voldemort, to be seen by him, to be used by him. That was her glory, that was her purpose. When she duelled in the Department of Mysteries, when she killed Sirius Black, With that eerie, girlish laugh still on her lips, she was not acting from ambition. She was proving her loyalty. "I killed Sirius Black," she sang, not to claim power or earn promotion, but because it delighted her to serve Voldemort through violence. That murder was a gift, an offering. She was a priestess in the temple of Voldemort's ideology, not a general seeking rank. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Bellatrix shows her disdain for strategic thinking. She is the one who openly doubts Snape and questions his loyalty, not because she wishes to challenge Voldemort's decisions, but because she cannot bear the idea that another might be trusted more than she. She confronts Snape at Spinner's End alongside Narcissa Malfoy, questioning his role in the grand scheme. But even here, she doesn't argue for herself. "He trusts me. I know he does," she says, her voice shaking with emotion. That is what matters to her. Not command, not planning, trust. Bellatrix did not want to lead the Death Eaters. She didn't want the burden of choosing targets or rallying followers. She wanted to be Voldemort's hand, his blade, his instrument of terror. She was happiest when given a direct order: kill, torture, fetch, guard. She would execute these commands with a fanatic gleam in her eye and a frenzied loyalty in her voice. In the Deathly Hallows, during the raid on Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix reacts with uncontrollable fear when she suspects that the sword of Gryffindor might have been taken from her vault. Her concern is not for the treasure, but for how Voldemort would view her failure. This moment reveals the fundamental truth of her character. The fear she expresses is not the fear of punishment from a superior officer, but the horror of disappointing a god. "He will be so angry," she whispers, pale and trembling. Bellatrix, who can face a room full of enemies with a cackle and a curse, crumbles at the thought of losing Voldemort's favor. This is not a woman who dreams of replacing him. This is a woman who cannot breathe without his approval.
Even her marriage tells us something. She is wed to Rodolphus Lestrange, a Death Eater himself, yet we are never shown any warmth between them. There is no affection, no shared ambition. Rodolphus is a detail in her story, not a partner. Her true union, emotional and spiritual, is with Voldemort. She worships him. In The Cursed Child, we learn that Bellatrix bore his child, Delphine. While the canon status of this play is debated among fans, it aligns with what we know. Bellatrix's obsession with the Dark Lord surpassed even the boundaries of war and death. She would bear his legacy, not through power, but through submission.
Contrast her with characters like Barty Crouch Jr., who was brilliant, manipulative, and perhaps more suited to strategy, or with Peter Pettigrew, who constantly sought security and status through servitude. Bellatrix needed none of that. She didn't serve Voldemort because she feared him or because she hoped to gain. She served because she believed Voldemort was her salvation, her purpose, her god. In this sense, Bellatrix was less a lieutenant and more a zealot. She does not dispute Voldemort's choices. When he rewards others, she doesn't publicly complain. She may seethe with jealousy, as she did when Snape was elevated, but she never rebels. Even in the Order of the Phoenix, when she fights alongside her fellow Death Eaters, Bellatrix isn't coordinating. She's not shouting orders or organizing retreat. She is dueling, killing, laughing. She is chaos incarnate, and chaos doesn't lead, it obeys. Her time in Azkaban further reveals her unique mindset. 10 years in that fortress, surrounded by Dementors, did not break her. When she escapes, she emerges wilder, yes, but also unchanged in her purpose. She never questions why Voldemort left her there. She doesn't accuse him of abandonment. Instead, she views her survival as a badge of honor. "The Dark Lord has risen again, and he will reward us beyond all our dreams," she cries in The Goblet of Fire. There is no bitterness in her voice, only joy. This level of fanaticism is rare among the Death Eaters. Others deserted Voldemort when he fell. Others denied him. Others turned. But Bellatrix? She waited, she endured, and when he rose again, she didn't demand restitution, she demanded orders. Her loyalty was not conditional on treatment. That is not ambition, it is religious devotion. Bellatrix's madness is often mistaken for hunger, for power. But power requires calculation, it requires compromise. Bellatrix is not capable of those things. Her outbursts, her wild laughter, her cruelty, they are not tools to climb a ladder. They are the expressions of a woman already at the peak of her own personal summit, the favour of her lord. Number 18, she was not entirely emotionless. Of all the figures lurking in the shadowy corners of the wizarding world, few have stirred as much fear and fascination as Bellatrix Lestrange. Her name alone conjures images of wild-eyed laughter, deadly spells, and unwavering devotion to the Dark Lord. But to see her only as a ruthless killing machine is to miss a far more unsettling truth. Bellatrix Lestrange was not entirely devoid of emotion. In fact, within the pages of Harry Potter, there are flickers, brief, unsettling, almost perverse, of something resembling feeling. They are easy to miss, drowned out by her maniacal rage and delight in cruelty, but they are there. And when they appear, they reveal something far more complex and disturbing than simple evil. Take the moment of Voldemort's final fall during the Battle of Hogwarts. Bellatrix's death is often overshadowed by Molly Weasley's triumphant duel and iconic words, "Not my daughter, you bitch." But what precedes that moment deserves attention. Just before her end, Bellatrix is engaged in a wild, furious duel, defending her master with ferocity unmatched by anyone else. Voldemort had been her reason for existing, her master, her god, her obsession. When he begins to falter, she becomes a creature of desperation. This is not just loyalty, it is panic, it is dread. It is heartbreak in a woman who has wrapped her identity so tightly around another that his demise signals her own. There is no gloating, no speech, no moment of cruel dominance. Bellatrix dies not with glee, but with a kind of frantic despair. She was fighting for something she loved. And when that love faced its ruin, so did she. Then there's the moment in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince when she accompanies Narcissa Malfoy to Spinner's End. It is a rare and jarring image. Bellatrix, seated tensely in the living room of Severus Snape, listening to her sister plead for help. Her expressions are flickers of internal conflict, torn between contempt for Snape and concern for her nephew Draco. She doesn't shout, she doesn't cast curses, she listens, and when Narcissa insists on making an unbreakable vow, Bellatrix does not stop her. She objects, "Yes, sissy, you can't do this, he can't be trusted." But she does not force her will. Instead, she becomes a silent witness, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed. It is not submission. It is something closer to resignation, perhaps even fear. Not for herself, but for Draco. This moment matters because Bellatrix is not the kind of woman who usually lets anything slide. She is willful, manipulative, obsessive. Yet here she yields to her sister's pain. She scowls and snarls, but ultimately allows the vow to proceed. It speaks to something unspoken between the sisters, a bond not entirely consumed by ideology. And though Bellatrix would later be instrumental in torturing Hermione and helping kill Dobby, this quiet moment in Spinner's End lingers as a contradiction. Bellatrix Lestrange was not devoid of human connection. She simply twisted it into the shapes most pleasing to her cruelty. Perhaps the most startling example of Bellatrix's hidden emotional world comes from an unexpected place, the Black family's ancient house elf, Creature. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Kreacher is a bitter, muttering relic of an old world, loyal only to those who shared his blood. He idolizes the dead mistress of the house and despises his new master, Sirius. But as Harry listens to Kreacher's tales, he uncovers something strange. Bellatrix, along with Narcissa, treated Kreacher with unexpected kindness. Miss Bellatrix always liked poor Kreacher, the elf says, his eyes gleaming. Kreacher would do anything for her. And he does. He follows her commands, keeps her secrets, and ultimately leads Sirius to his death. This may seem like further proof of Bellatrix's manipulative nature, but in the context of how purebloods often treated house elves, it is chillingly significant. Bellatrix, the woman who laughed while torturing teenagers, showed something like affection to a creature most wizards considered beneath them. It wasn't a facade, it wasn't a trick, it was consistent with her values. Blood mattered, loyalty mattered, and in her twisted moral world, Kreacher had earned something resembling regard, that she could feel anything warm at all toward another being, however dark the logic behind it, unsettles the image of a completely soulless villain. And yet, the moment that perhaps most clearly reveals Bellatrix's emotional chaos comes after the Department of Mysteries. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, following her breakout from Azkaban, we glimpse what years in prison have done to her mind. She is feral. The woman gave a mad shriek of laughter, the narrator says, describing her in the Death Eater's circle. But look closer, this is not simply joy. She is unhinged, yes, but driven by something deeper than madness. She is fueled by grief. Azkaban took everything from Bellatrix except her obsession. The only thing keeping her whole during those dark, soul-draining years was her belief in Voldemort's eventual return. When he finally reappears, she is reborn in a storm of loyalty. But her loyalty isn't just ideological, it's spiritual. When Voldemort speaks to her, she doesn't just listen, she worships. My lord, she whispers, eyes wide. It's not politics, it's religion. Bellatrix doesn't follow Voldemort like a soldier follows a general. She clings to him like a dying woman to a god. That kind of attachment is an emotion so intense it burns through reason. It isn't love, not in any healthy form, but it is love's sick, shadowed cousin. She didn't merely want to serve him. She wanted to become part of him. The moment Voldemort shows even the slightest favor to others, like praising Snape, Bellatrix bristles with jealousy. She wants to be the only one. In the Half-Blood Prince, when Voldemort dismisses her doubts about Snape's loyalty, she cannot hide her displeasure. "But, my lord," she begins, only to be cut off. Her voice trembles, her composure falters. This is not defiance, it is heartbreak. She is wounded that Voldemort does not see her devotion as uniquely precious. It is the wounded cry of a woman scorned, not romantically but existentially. Number 19. Bellatrix was not close with her sisters. Bellatrix Black was born into one of the oldest and most noble pure-blood families in Wizarding Britain, but even within such an illustrious lineage, bonds of sisterhood proved fragile, frayed by ideology, pride, and an unyielding hunger for power. Her name, fierce and celestial, reflected the star from which it came, a warrior among constellations. But to those who knew her as a sister, she was far more tempest than starlight. Many imagine that Bellatrix, Narcissa, and Andromeda grew up arm in arm, whispering secrets behind the heavy velvet curtains of 12 Grimmauld Place. But reality paints a colder portrait. Even as children, Bellatrix's eyes burned too brightly with ambition. She was sharp-tongued, headstrong, and utterly obsessed with the purity of their bloodline. Conversations with her sisters were often less about dolls and dreams, and more about Salazar Slytherin's ideals and the taint of the Muggle world. Andromeda, the middle sister, had always been the gentle rebel. While Bellatrix devoured books on blood supremacy, Andromeda was quietly drawn to ideas of fairness, equality, and, most damning of all, love beyond lineage. Their childhood arguments would become explosive as they aged. Andromeda once recalled, years later in secret, how Bellatrix caught her reading a Muggle novel and had screamed, "You disgrace our name by touching that filth." Andromeda had cried for hours, not because of the words, but because she'd seen genuine hatred in her sister's eyes. When Andromeda fell in love with Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born wizard with a heart as wide as the sky, Bellatrix's reaction was nothing short of volcanic. She did not plead or argue. She did not cry. She simply cut her out like rot from a tree. The Black family tree, preserved in the tapestry of their ancestral home, soon bore the evidence. A scorched hole where Andromeda's name had once been, burned away without ceremony, as if she had never existed.
"I am not ashamed," Andromeda would later say, "but I mourn what she might have been. She chose darkness."
Bellatrix, for her part, never spoke Andromeda's name again. To her, the middle sister had committed the ultimate betrayal, not of family, but of purity. Blood mattered more than love, more than loyalty, more than the gentle ties that might have bound three girls together in the warmth of shared memories. With Narcissa, things were different, though not exactly warm. Narcissa was the youngest, the most elegant, the most calculating. She understood Bellatrix's madness, but did not share it. She aligned herself not through conviction, but survival. Marrying Lucius Malfoy had been a political decision as much as a romantic one. It kept her close to the Dark Lord's circle without needing to stain her hands as deeply as her sister did. Bellatrix and Narcissa's relationship was built less on affection than mutual understanding. Narcissa tolerated Bellatrix's fanaticism because it protected her. Bellatrix, in turn, respected Narcissa's cold efficiency. But love, that's harder to trace. When Narcissa broke ranks and begged Severus Snape to protect Draco, an act of desperation and maternal terror, Bellatrix was enraged. "You should be proud," she hissed. "The Dark Lord trusts him with a great task." But Narcissa replied, "He is my son, Bella. He is my flesh." That moment, subtle and brief, reveals everything. Narcissa valued blood too, but not in the way Bellatrix did. For Narcissa, it was about family. For Bellatrix, it was about ideology. One would risk everything to save a child. The other would kill to protect a bloodline. Their differences came to a head during the events of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. In the chapter Spinner's End, Bellatrix tries to prevent Narcissa from seeking Snape's help. She warns her sister that it is madness to question the Dark Lord's plan. "You ought to be honored, sissy," she snarls. "He trusts Draco to carry out a task." But even as she speaks, there's an edge to her voice, not of concern, but of contempt. She views Narcissa's fear as weakness. That conversation ends with Bellatrix reluctantly agreeing to witness the unbreakable vow, and her final words are sharp with suspicion. "I will never forget this, Severus." It is in that moment that we see Bellatrix not as a sister, but as a soldier of a cause. Her loyalty is not to Narcissa, not to family, but to Voldemort. Her love is not for blood as kin, but blood as doctrine. Even in the darkest times of the First and Second Wizarding Wars, Bellatrix never once sought out her estranged sister Andromeda. When Nymphadora Tonks, Andromeda's daughter, joined the Order of the Phoenix, Bellatrix was livid. She referred to her niece as the half-blood, never by name. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, she shrieks at Tonks during the Battle of Hogwarts, "I'll teach you to dare duel with your own aunt." That word, aunt, lands like a curse. Bellatrix wears it like armor, not affection. She later murders Tonks without hesitation, a child of her own blood, a young woman who might have sat at the same childhood table, played under the same summer skies. To Bellatrix, she was nothing but a stain, another traitor, another disappointment. This reveals a deeper tragedy. Bellatrix was not devoid of love, but she twisted it into a weapon. Her obsession with Voldemort, an all-consuming, unreciprocated devotion, replaced every human connection she might have had. In The Order of the Phoenix, when Sirius taunts her during the battle at the Department of Mysteries, her face contorts with fury. "Come on, you can do better than that," he shouts. And she does. She strikes him down, her own cousin. And she laughs. She laughs when family dies. She kills when family defies. Her version of love is allegiance. Her version of sisterhood is submission. When Narcissa lies to Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, claiming that Harry Potter is dead, she does so to protect her son. In that one act, she saves the wizarding world. Bellatrix would never have done the same. If Draco had fallen on the battlefield, Bellatrix would have wept, perhaps, but she would have praised his sacrifice for the cause. That was always her faith. Andromeda survived the war, but the cost was brutal. She lost Ted, she lost Tonks, she lost Remus, her son-in-law. She was the only one left, standing among the ruins of what could have been a family. Somewhere deep in the Black family vaults there may have once been a locket or letter passed between sisters, but by the end all that remained was silence and scorched names on a tapestry. There's irony in how Bellatrix died, struck down by Molly Weasley, a mother fighting for her daughter. That scene, iconic and raw, mirrors everything Bellatrix never understood about real family. "Not my daughter, you bitch!" Molly roars, and in that ferocity lies pure, selfless love, a mother's fury, the kind of love Bellatrix never gave and never received. And in that moment, Bellatrix's greatest weakness is exposed, not her madness, not her cruelty, but her isolation. She had power, prestige, the Dark Lord's favor, but when death came, no sister reached for her hand, no soul wept for her. The Black Sisters had the potential to be a triumvirate of strength. Different, yes, but strong together. Andromeda, the brave heart, Narcissa, the cold mind, Bellatrix, the wildfire. But their house, as proud as it was, never taught them to love each other, only to compete, to be worthy, to be pure. What remains of them after the war is just shadows. Andromeda raising Teddy Lupin with quiet grief. Narcissa fading into the margins, her family spared but her name forever stained. And Bellatrix? A name spoken with fear and revulsion, her legacy not of sisterhood but of fanaticism. In the end, Bellatrix Black could not be a sister because she could not be human in the ways that mattered. She served a master who demanded everything, and she gave it, her soul, her family, her future. Her name may be remembered, but her heart, once perhaps capable of warmth, was buried long before she fell in battle. She might have loved once, laughed in the corridors of their home with Narcissa and Andromeda. She might have braided hair or shared secrets by moonlight. But all of that was lost to the fire she chose, a fire that consumed everything, including the ties that once made her a sister. Number 20. Bellatrix was not exclusively cruel to enemies. Bellatrix Lestrange never needed a reason to be cruel. Her cruelty was not a tool, but a temperament. It clung to her like the tattered black robes she wore, seeping into every word she spoke and every gesture she made. There are those who argue she was only merciless when provoked, that her savagery was the price of loyalty to Voldemort. But such a view is naive. Her violence was not conditional. Bellatrix didn't wait for resistance to bare her teeth. She inflicted agony for the sheer, intoxicating pleasure of it. She didn't just strike back, she hunted. She didn't just torture, she played. The moment when this became undeniable, when the mask of loyalty cracked to reveal the ravenous madness beneath, was during the horrifying hours Hermione Granger spent in the dungeons of Malfoy Manor. There, in the cold shadow of that house, Bellatrix's madness bloomed like a poisoned flower. Her victim was not a hardened soldier or a defiant Death Eater hunter. She was a 17-year-old girl who had fought to protect others, and Bellatrix broke her without blinking. This was not a duel, it was not a battlefield, it was a parlour furnished with dark elegance, where Bellatrix stood with her wand in one hand and Hermione's scream in the other. She asked questions, yes, even about Gryffindor's sword, but the interrogation was a formality. The violence came first, the scream came first. "How did you get this sword? Where did you get this sword?" she shrieked as Hermione writhed before her. But it was clear from the start the answer was irrelevant. What mattered was the fear in Hermione's eyes, the trembling in her voice, and the breaking of her strength, piece by fragile piece. The others heard it all. Ron Weasley, downstairs in the basement, pounding on the walls until his fists bled. Harry, helpless, hearing Hermione cry out again and again until the sound burned into his soul. Even Griphook, the goblin, watched in grim silence, perhaps understanding better than the humans that this was not discipline, it was devouring. Bellatrix did not flinch from the cries, she revelled in them. The book does not linger on Hermione's screams for pages, but in those few sharp lines, J.K. Rowling gave us more horror than 1,000 duels could have. "You'll be next, mudblood," Bellatrix hissed, her voice soaked with venom and glee. Hermione was not her enemy. She was not a threat. She was a teenager with a wand in her pocket and books in her bag. And still, Bellatrix carved into her with the glee of a child unwrapping a present. That moment, more than any battle, reveals the heart of Bellatrix Lestrange. A woman who didn't need a war to justify torture. A woman whose cruelty was not a weapon, but a desire. Her madness wasn't random, it was targeted, but not in the way most people think. Yes, she fought viciously in the Department of Mysteries, and yes, she howled with delight when she struck down Sirius Black, laughing even as he fell through the veil. But Sirius was her cousin. And for Bellatrix, bloodlines were not sacred. They were prisons she burned. When she laughed at his death, it wasn't merely victory, it was desecration. Come out, little baby Potter," she cooed, prowling the shattered corridors of the ministry like a cat searching for wounded mice. The war had made her worse, but it did not make her cruel. She had always been that way. Even Narcissa, her own sister, feared her. There was a tightness in Narcissa's words whenever Bellatrix spoke too long or laughed too hard. "If Draco should fail," Narcissa whispered in that same Malfoy drawing room, and Bellatrix snapped, her face contorting with fury. "He will not fail! You should be proud!" But beneath her anger was something darker, a refusal to let even family question the Dark Lord. She was not just defending Voldemort, she was reminding Narcissa that love was a weakness, and she, Bellatrix, had long since burned hers away.
But the truth is, Bellatrix loved. She loved Voldemort in a way that devoured her sanity. She bowed to no one but him, but she did not love like a servant. She loved like a zealot. In The Deathly Hallows, we're told that Bellatrix's gaze rested upon Voldemort, and her eyes burned with a fanatical, feverish glow. She was not devoted, she was consumed, and when Voldemort spoke, she listened, not with reverence, but hunger. In that hunger she found purpose, and in that purpose she found license to destroy anyone who looked at her the wrong way.
Her victims were not always fighters. Remember the Longbottoms. Frank and Alice were not killed. They were shattered, tortured into madness, broken so thoroughly by Bellatrix and her companions that they lived out the rest of their lives in St. Mungo's, unable to recognize their own son. And again, this was not a moment of desperation. It was a performance. She laughed as she did it. "The Dark Lord will rise again," she screamed in the courtroom, even as she was dragged to Azkaban. She wore her crimes like medals. Bellatrix did not differentiate between threat and target. Muggle, wizard, child, it didn't matter. If they were in her way, if they breathed against the wind of Voldemort's rule, they were fair game. She was chaos in human form, and pain was her language. Even Dobby, the house elf, found no mercy. When he appeared in Malfoy Manor and freed Harry and his friends, Bellatrix screamed in fury. "You filthy little monkey!" she shrieked, hurling a knife with such ferocity that it pierced Dobby's heart. He died in Harry's arms, whispering, "Such a beautiful place to be with friends." And even in death, Bellatrix had stolen something pure. She wasn't driven by strategy. She didn't kill Dobby because he was a threat. She killed him because she could. Because in her twisted world, disobedience, especially from a creature she deemed inferior, was the ultimate insult. Her anger wasn't tactical, it was personal, feral, volcanic. That knife, thrown not with precision, but with hatred, was the purest distillation of who she was. She did not fear consequence. Her time in Azkaban did not make her repent. It made her worse. The years behind bars carved deeper the madness in her eyes. When she escaped, she came back not as a humbled follower, but as a prophet of destruction. Her laugh, high, cruel, echoing through the ministry during the battle, was a signal. Bellatrix was not just back, she was free, and freedom meant carnage. Even Voldemort sometimes seemed unsettled by her devotion. When she offered to bear him a child, he refused, not with warmth, not even with disgust, but with distance. He saw her as useful, perhaps, but not as equal. And yet Bellatrix obeyed, not out of fear, but love. That love was like a flame in her, blinding and uncontrolled. Her loyalty was not grounded in belief or ideology. It was romantic, twisted, obsessive, and that obsession bled into everything she did, especially how she treated those who dared to live in a world without Voldemort. Bellatrix was not a fanatic of ideals. She was a fanatic of Voldemort himself. That distinction is everything. It's what made her dangerous even when Voldemort was absent. Other Death Eaters waited for orders. She invented them. Others hesitated. She dove headlong into chaos. There was no leash strong enough, no command gentle enough. She was not just a soldier of darkness, she was its priestess. And her temple was pain. In the final battle, she laughed as she duelled Hermione, Ginny, and Luna all at once, 3 young witches fighting for their lives. Bellatrix had the skill to kill them quickly, but she didn't. She toyed with them. "You filthy little half-blood!" she spat at Hermione. "You dare to fight me!" Her voice was shrill with the joy of the hunt. She was a predator playing with prey. Even then, when the war hung in the balance, her instinct was not efficiency. It was torment. Only Molly Weasley stopped her. "Not my daughter!" Molly screamed, her voice rising above the thunder of the battle. Bellatrix laughed. Of course she did. She had killed before. Mothers, fathers, children. It made no difference. And yet, in that moment, the tide turned. Bellatrix met an opponent not with fear, but with rage. A mother's rage. She underestimated it. And in that flash of light, she died, shocked, defiant, and perhaps, finally, afraid. Her end was not noble. It was not tragic. It was the collapse of a storm. Bellatrix Lestrange did not fight for peace or justice or even victory. She fought because pain thrilled her, because screams were music, because cruelty made her feel alive. To call her brutality reserved for enemies is to misunderstand her entirely. Her violence was indiscriminate. It was a joy, not a duty. She was a fire without warmth, a scream in human skin, and she would have burned the whole world for just one smile from the Dark Lord. Number 21. Bellatrix did not respect Lucius Malfoy. Bellatrix Lestrange never hid her scorn. In a world ruled by bloodlines, secrets, and silent hierarchies, she wielded her cruelty like a dagger, sharp, fast, and meant to draw blood. And while many in the ranks of the Death Eaters feared her, Lucius Malfoy, with his silver cane and self-important gaze, was one she neither feared nor respected. Their alliance was one of necessity, born of family ties and shared ideology, but it was never one of admiration. Bellatrix had no tolerance for weakness, and in Lucius she saw only the hollow remains of a man who once pretended to be brave. The turning point came after the Department of Mysteries debacle, a night that stripped away Lucius Malfoy's illusions of grandeur and revealed him to Bellatrix for what he truly was. Voldemort had trusted him with a critical task, retrieve the prophecy that could change the course of their war. Lucius had failed, spectacularly, captured on the floor of the Ministry, wandless, exposed, humiliated. His downfall was not just a strategic failure, it was personal. "You should be proud," Bellatrix had taunted, her voice thick with mockery. "Your name will be remembered for how quickly you fell." From the moment they returned to the shadows, Bellatrix's contempt only deepened. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the Malfoy Manor became a grim symbol of Lucius's decline. He was no longer the elegant host presiding over political intrigues. He was a disgraced man, avoided even by Voldemort himself. The Dark Lord had claimed the Malfoy home for his headquarters, and with that came a silent declaration. The Malfoys now served at his leisure. Bellatrix's delight in this demotion was palpable. When she walked those corridors, it was with the confidence of a favoured general, not a guest. At the infamous meeting around the long, dark table, Voldemort took Lucius's wand. "Give me your wand," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a test, a punishment. And Lucius, pale and shaking, obeyed. Bellatrix watched the exchange with narrowed eyes, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She didn't need to speak. Her silence screamed louder than words, "You are nothing now." Narcissa, sitting beside her husband, stiffened, but Bellatrix didn't comfort her sister. She didn't believe in comforting weakness. Bellatrix's scorn wasn't simply a matter of cruelty. In her mind, Lucius had betrayed the very essence of what it meant to be a Death Eater. She prided herself on loyalty, on madness, yes, but devoted madness. Azkaban hadn't broken her. It had forged her. She had spent 14 years in that frozen fortress and emerged fanatical. Lucius, by contrast, had crumbled under the weight of public disgrace and a short stint in captivity. He returned home, not with fire in his veins, but with fear in his eyes. Bellatrix despised fear. Her derision only grew as Draco was pulled into Voldemort's inner plans. In her view, Lucius had failed as a man, and now he was failing as a father. Bellatrix, ever the brutal pragmatist, believed Draco would die in his mission to kill Dumbledore. She spoke about it without sentiment, without hope. Lucius, however, clung to a delusional idea that his son would survive. In his mind, redemption was still possible. Bellatrix watched him with disbelief. She didn't see a man trying to protect his family. She saw a coward praying for miracles he hadn't earned. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, during the scene where the trio is captured and brought to Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix is unhinged but focused. When she suspects that the sword of Gryffindor is in their possession, her rage explodes. She turns to torture Hermione, shrieking and howling with glee. Lucius, on the other hand, stands paralyzed, uncertain, ineffective. Even when Harry is at his most vulnerable, Lucius falters. He looks to others for instruction, a follower without resolve. Bellatrix doesn't even ask for his help. He is no longer part of the equation. Her disregard was never more vivid than in her constant interruptions. Bellatrix had a habit of talking over Lucius, correcting him, mocking him. She did not see him as an equal. "Don't talk to me like I'm your wife," she snapped once, when he dared to question her tactics. It was a slap in the face to Narcissa, but also a declaration. Lucius's voice had no value here. In her mind, his era had passed, if it had ever existed at all. The age of cunning aristocrats was over. The age of bloodthirsty fanatics had begun. When Voldemort punished Lucius, Bellatrix never intervened. She stood aside and watched. Even in moments when Voldemort's wrath reduced Lucius to trembling silence, Bellatrix's gaze remained cold. Some might have expected her to show solidarity, to protect her sister's husband. But Bellatrix's loyalty was not to family. It was to Voldemort, and Voldemort alone. Anyone who failed him was already dead to her. Lucius had made his bed. Bellatrix had no intention of sharing the grave. There is a particularly striking moment during the Malfoy Manor scene when Voldemort asks for Harry's location. Lucius, Narcissa, and Draco hesitate. But Bellatrix, she leaps forward, ready to kill, ready to burn. She doesn't need permission. Her eyes gleam with fanaticism, and Voldemort rewards that insanity. It is in that moment that the contrast between her and Lucius becomes unbearable. Lucius is paralyzed by consequences, Bellatrix is fueled by them. Even among Death Eaters, Bellatrix's scorn for Lucius was well known. Yaxley once joked, "Careful, Malfoy, Bellatrix bites." It wasn't a compliment, it was a warning. Bellatrix didn't just question Lucius's decisions, she undermined them at every turn. She took pleasure in watching his fall from grace. To her, his suffering was proof of divine justice. "He wore his mask too loosely," she once whispered. "Now the world sees the worm underneath." It wasn't always so blatant. In the early days before Azkaban, Bellatrix tolerated Lucius the way a wolf might tolerate a well-dressed sheepdog. He had influence, money, and access. But once power shifted, once Voldemort's gaze turned toward other, more ruthless followers, Bellatrix no longer needed to pretend. Her disgust spilled into the open. She would roll her eyes when Lucius spoke. She would mutter curses under her breath when he offered advice. Even the younger Death Eaters noticed. "Why does she hate him so much?" asked one. The answer was simple: because he failed. Bellatrix's hatred of failure bordered on religious. Her fanaticism made her see the world in absolutes, those who served the Dark Lord without question, and those who didn't deserve to live. Lucius had hesitated. That was unforgivable. She never forgave him for not going to Azkaban. "I was proud," she once screamed during a duel, "to suffer for my lord. And where were you, Malfoy? Polishing your silverware?" It wasn't just mockery, it was war. Narcissa was the only reason Bellatrix didn't go further. As much as she disdained Lucius, she still had a bond with her sister. That bond tempered her rage, but only barely. When Draco was in danger, Bellatrix became even more volatile, convinced that Lucius's weakness had cursed the boy. She believed that if she had raised Draco, he would be a soldier, not a trembling puppet. Her overprotective behavior toward Draco wasn't affection. It was disgust disguised as guidance. "Don't be like your father," she whispered to him once. "He's already lost." There is no redemption in Bellatrix's eyes, no room for forgiveness. Once Lucius was marked by failure, he was unworthy. And as Voldemort's losses grew, Bellatrix's madness intensified. She became more violent, more erratic, more dangerous. Lucius, by contrast, became more desperate. He clung to shadows, hoping for mercy. But mercy had no place in the world they had built together. In the end, Bellatrix died for Voldemort. Her last breath was a scream of defiance in battle, fighting Molly Weasley with the ferocity of a demon. Lucius? He survived, but barely, defeated, broken, silent. At the Battle of Hogwarts, he wandered the halls like a ghost, searching for his son, no longer concerned with victory or glory. Bellatrix would have spat on such an ending. Better to die for a cause, she might have said, than live without a spine. Their legacies couldn't be more different. Bellatrix is remembered as the mad witch who would kill without blinking. Lucius is remembered as the man who lost everything because he refused to choose. In Bellatrix's world, there was no middle ground. You were either with the darkness or crushed by it. And Lucius, trembling, pale, diminished, had already been crushed. Bellatrix never respected Lucius because she never saw him as her equal, not in devotion, not in sacrifice, not in power. To her, he was a relic of a dying age, a coward in peacock feathers. And in the cold silence of Malfoy Manor, filled with the ghosts of failure and ambition, her laughter echoed loudest. Number 22. She was not selfish. Of all the Death Eaters who pledged themselves to Lord Voldemort, few were as feared, as ruthless, or as utterly devoted as Bellatrix Lestrange. While others followed the Dark Lord with ambition in their eyes, hoping for power, influence, or revenge, Bellatrix was different. Her loyalty was not transactional. She did not weigh personal gain against the risks of serving Voldemort. She did not crave political power, the wealth of conquered families, or even personal safety. Her soul burned only for him. Many mistook her devotion for madness. Perhaps they weren't wrong, but it was not a hunger for material things that stirred her blood. Even when offered comfort, prestige, or luxury, Bellatrix turned away. She was born into the House of Black, one of the oldest and most respected pure-blood families in Wizarding Britain. Through her marriage into the Lestrange family, her social standing rose even further. She had every opportunity to live a charmed life at elegant manors, to host grand parties, to revel in pure-blood superiority from a polished distance. But none of it mattered to her. Instead, she chose Azkaban. When Bellatrix Lestrange stood in court, accused of torturing Frank and Alice Longbottom into madness, she did not plead innocence or ask for leniency. She didn't weep or flinch as the charges were read. No, she held her head high, smiled with a kind of terrible reverence, and proclaimed, "The Dark Lord will rise again, Crouch. Throw us into Azkaban. We will wait. He will return, and we will be rewarded." Her voice was filled with something terrifying. Fear, not greed, but faith. That moment alone tells us everything about her nature. She did not serve Voldemort in the hope of reward. She served him as a disciple, willing to suffer endlessly just to prove her loyalty. It's easy to assume that all Death Eaters were driven by ambition. Lucius Malfoy, for example, clearly had political goals. His family's influence was immense, and even after Voldemort's return, he was more concerned with preserving the Malfoy name and status than risking his life on reckless missions. Narcissa Malfoy, Bellatrix's own sister, lied to Voldemort when it suited her needs to protect her son. Even Severus Snape, for all his secrets and double-dealing, was ultimately motivated by a love he could not bury. But Bellatrix? She wanted nothing for herself, At the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, Bellatrix fought not like a soldier but like a worshipper defending her god. She struck down her own cousin Sirius Black with a cruel laugh that echoed through the black stone chamber. "I killed Sirius Black!" she cried, her voice childlike and unhinged. There was no political gain in murdering her own blood. If anything, she risked weakening her own family line. But Bellatrix had never cared about blood for its own sake. What mattered to her was Voldemort. Killing Sirius was a gift to him, a way to eliminate those who stood against his will. There is no moment that better encapsulates Bellatrix's self-abandonment than her time in Azkaban. She spent 14 years in that soul-devouring prison, surrounded by Dementors, her body withering, her mind deteriorating, but her faith remained unshaken. When Voldemort returned, she was among the first to be broken out. And unlike the others, who emerged pale, broken, and bitter, Bellatrix stepped forward proudly, still filled with her terrible fire. Her voice, when she spoke, did not tremble. Her loyalty had never dimmed. Even Voldemort seemed to recognize her unmatched dedication. He did not reward her with gold, land, or titles. He offered her what she truly desired, his attention. She was often at his side during the Second Wizarding War. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Narcissa sought Snape's help to protect Draco, Bellatrix accompanied her, not out of familial concern, but to challenge Snape's loyalty. "You're not trying to conceal your own cowardice, are you?" she sneered, casting doubt upon a man she did not trust. Bellatrix did not tolerate half measures. If you served the Dark Lord, you served absolutely or not at all. There's something tragic in her obsession. Beneath the madness and cruelty, Bellatrix was a woman who had abandoned everything, wealth, comfort, even family, in pursuit of a cause that could never love her back. Voldemort was incapable of love. He used her devotion as a tool, and she never noticed or never cared. Her worship was so complete that she found joy in pain if it pleased him. During the torture of Hermione Granger at Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix sliced into the girl's skin with the word mudblood, not merely out of sadism, but to demonstrate loyalty to her master's ideology. Her lack of greed is most visible in contrast with other followers. Peter Pettigrew, the coward who betrayed his friends, followed Voldemort for protection. Barty Crouch Jr., for all his fanaticism, was shaped by resentment and rejection. But Bellatrix, her family already held power, her blood was pure, she had no need to bow to anyone, and yet she chose to kneel. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Bellatrix becomes obsessed with protecting the sword of Gryffindor once it is taken from her vault. But not out of greed. She's terrified that she has failed Voldemort by allowing a treasure he deemed important to slip through her fingers. Her fear is not for herself, but for what her failure might mean to him. That moment in Gringotts when she screams in panic is not the panic of a woman losing riches, but the panic of a zealot who fears divine wrath. She never once expressed desire for leadership. Even when the Death Eaters began to take control of the ministry, Bellatrix did not push for a role in governance. She was not a strategist, not a planner. She was a sword, a flame, a burning offering to her master. Her reward was his presence, his approval. When Voldemort looked at her, when he trusted her with missions others failed to complete, that was enough. This single-mindedness made her dangerous. You can negotiate with the power-hungry, you can threaten the greedy, but you cannot reason with the faithful. Bellatrix was not after control. She already had power and wealth. What she craved was annihilation in his service, the chance to become part of something larger, even if it consumed her completely. Her final moments in the Battle of Hogwarts reflect this truth. She fought like a possessed being, unafraid of death, as if her only fear was letting him down. She faced off against Molly Weasley, laughing, taunting, her eyes wild. She underestimated the power of a mother's love and paid with her life. But even in death, Bellatrix didn't beg, didn't run, didn't plead. She died as she lived, with fire in her eyes and Voldemort's name on her breath. Her vault at Gringotts contained ancient treasures and powerful artifacts, but she never flaunted them. Unlike Lucius Malfoy, who paraded his cane and manner, Bellatrix never dressed for display. Her wild hair, her sunken eyes, her tattered clothes, these were the marks of someone who lived in obsession. Not even her family meant more to her than her cause. She turned on her niece, Nymphadora Tonks, without hesitation. Andromeda, her sister, was already dead to her for marrying a Muggle-born. Bellatrix's devotion stripped away all ties that did not lead to Voldemort. In the Half-Blood Prince, her spell work is brutal and efficient. She sets fire to Hagrid's hut with a flick of her wand, vanishes into the night with a crazed laugh. There is no reward for her in these acts, no medals, no coins. But she moves with a sense of holy purpose, as though every act of violence in Voldemort's name sanctifies her. Even her marriage to Rodolphus Lestrange was empty. There is no hint in the books or films of any affection between them, no shared missions, no intimate dialogue. He is a name, a shadow behind her. Her real bond was with Voldemort, a bond so twisted and unrequited it consumed her completely. It is whispered among fans and hinted in The Cursed Child that she bore his child. Whether this is canon or not, it reflects a deep truth. Bellatrix did not live for herself. She lived for him. Ultimately, she was not motivated by gold or influence or fear. She was moved by something far more dangerous, devotion without limits. The kind of devotion that makes a person forget themselves, the kind of devotion that smiles in court, that laughs while killing family, that waits in prison for a ghost of a promise. Bellatrix Lestrange may have been monstrous, she may have been cruel beyond forgiveness, but she was never greedy. She did not serve for what she could take, but for what she could give. Her life, her soul, her sanity, all were offerings at the altar of a man who would never truly care. And that, more than her crimes, is what made her terrifying. Number 23. Bellatrix never wanted to replace Voldemort. Bellatrix Lestrange was never meant to be a usurper. The notion that she harbored secret ambitions to dethrone Lord Voldemort and take his place among the dark rulers of wizardkind is not just false, it is profoundly misunderstood. Every action she took, every word she spoke, every look she gave him throughout the series was not of a rival but of a devotee. She did not crave his throne, she craved his gaze. Bellatrix wasn't dreaming of power in the way Tom Riddle did. Her hunger was not for domination, but for devotion, for the chance to live and die in the shadow of the man she considered a god. When she knelt before him, it was not a performance, it was her religion. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Snape remarks with mild disdain, "Bellatrix, if I had not known better, I'd have thought you had developed a passion for Lord Voldemort." But that wasn't an exaggeration, it was the truth he only dared to speak mockingly. Her obsession was not subtle, it burned from her in every word. Bellatrix didn't hide her feelings, she didn't even think to. Why would she hide reverence? She was born into the ancient House of Black, raised to believe in blood purity and wizarding supremacy. But Lord Voldemort gave her more than a cause. He gave her purpose. In Order of the Phoenix, she is shown to laugh ecstatically when Voldemort appears at the Department of Mysteries, as if her god had come down to the battlefield himself. She did not flee when he came, She rose to greet him like a worshipper seeing the face of her savior. This was not the behavior of a schemer waiting to inherit the throne. It was the raw devotion of someone whose identity had fused with her loyalty. Bellatrix's time in Azkaban only cemented this. 10 years in the darkest prison of the magical world broke most Death Eaters, but not her. When she escapes in Goblet of Fire, Sirius tells Harry, she was born to be a Death Eater. The image of her in the newspaper, wild, gaunt, eyes gleaming with fanaticism, shows not a woman broken by isolation, but one who thrived on the purity of her cause. She didn't betray him, she didn't waver, she endured 10 years of horror for the man she worshipped. And when she returned, she came back as fierce as ever. Her first words upon rejoining him are not of complaint or demands. She simply kneels. In Half-Blood Prince, when Narcissa turns to Snape for help in protecting Draco, Bellatrix follows her sister reluctantly, but even there she cannot restrain herself. She berates Snape, questions his loyalty, demands proof. Why? Because she senses a traitor, because she wants to protect Voldemort's mission. And when Snape swears the unbreakable vow, Bellatrix finally nods. Her loyalty, again, is to her lord, not to her sister, not to her blood, not even to her husband. Her entire focus is on the preservation of Voldemort's will. Her marriage to Rodolphus Lestrange is, in every way, a formality. There is not a single passage in the books that shows any sign of warmth or affection between them. Her heart belongs elsewhere. In Deathly Hallows, her fury when the prisoners escape Malfoy Manor is not about the loss of captives, it's about disobedience, about failure before Voldemort. She screams at the others, lashes out at anyone who might have disappointed him. She reacts like a high priestess, fearing the wrath of her god. Some fans point to her sadism as proof that she might have wanted to lead. But Bellatrix's love for cruelty was not independent of Voldemort. It was for his sake. She tortured the Longbottoms not because she hoped to gain power, but because they were his enemies. She delighted in violence, yes, but always in service to him. "You need to be taught a lesson, my dear," she tells Hermione at Malfoy Manor, carving into the girl's arm the word mudblood. It was not about ruling. It was about enforcing Voldemort's doctrine with religious fervor. And let us not ignore the scene at the Battle of Hogwarts. When Voldemort arrives and calls for Harry Potter to be delivered to him, Bellatrix is at his side, eyes shining. She does not lead the charge. She does not seize the moment to rally the Death Eaters. She waits for his command. When Molly Weasley confronts her, Bellatrix duels with glee, but not for personal glory. She is fighting for the vision of the world Voldemort promised her, the world where blood purity reigned, and she, his most loyal, might be rewarded, not with rule, but with proximity to his power. Voldemort's own treatment of Bellatrix confirms her position. He trusts her in ways he does not trust others. He allows her to stand closer to him than almost any other Death Eater. In Half-Blood Prince, she is present when he humiliates Narcissa. Yet Voldemort does not silence Bellatrix. He knows she is loyal, perhaps the only one who truly is. He does not suspect her, does not test her, not the way he does with Lucius, who is punished harshly after the events at the Department of Mysteries. Bellatrix is above reproach in Voldemort's eyes. He sees her devotion and allows it because he knows she does not want his throne.
Even her death says everything. When she is finally defeated by Molly Weasley, Bellatrix fights to the end, laughing, manic, refusing to yield. She does not die trying to flee. She dies trying to kill. She dies in the midst of war, serving the cause to her final breath. No Death Eater, not even the most battle-hardened, matched her intensity. And she did not die as a general who had lost her army, but as a servant defending her god.
Some fans also speculate about the possibility that she wanted a child with Voldemort. This is explored in The Cursed Child, where she gives birth to Delphine. If we take that text as canon, then it only deepens her devotion. Delphine was not an heir to Bellatrix's rule, but a living testament to her submission. A child born of reverence, not ambition. Bellatrix wanted to give Voldemort a legacy, not replace him. She didn't raise Delphine to lead a movement or command Death Eaters. She bore the child to strengthen the bloodline of her lord. Bellatrix's language throughout the series is marked by reverence. When she addresses Voldemort, she uses words like, "my lord," and she says them with breathless awe. She is eager to please, desperate to remain in his good graces. She is never jealous of his power, only afraid of disappointing him. There is no trace of rivalry, no inner monologue suggesting she wishes to take control. In Deathly Hallows, she collapses to her knees when Voldemort is displeased. This is not the behavior of a woman planning a coup. Her fanaticism borders on the religious. She is not a lieutenant, she is a zealot, and this makes her dangerous, not because she might betray Voldemort, but because she never would. She would commit any atrocity in his name. There is a kind of madness in her love for him, but it is a loyal madness. In her eyes, Voldemort is infallible, divine, eternal. She might question others, Snape, Narcissa, even Lucius, but never him. Some readers misinterpret her confidence in battle and her dominant behavior with other Death Eaters as signs of ambition. But Bellatrix did not dominate to lead. She dominated to protect the purity of Voldemort's mission. She saw herself as the guardian of his will. Any Death Eater who failed him earned her scorn. Her cruelty toward her fellow followers came from a place of fury that they were not worthy of the cause. Voldemort himself was a master of manipulation. He could sense ambition in others, could twist it, control it, crush it. If Bellatrix had ever shown signs of wanting his throne, he would have destroyed her. But he never did, because he knew she didn't want it. She wanted him. And Voldemort, for all his arrogance, understood loyalty when he saw it. He tolerated no equals. He despised competitors. Yet Bellatrix lived, not only lived, thrived at his side. That is all the evidence we need. Even among Death Eaters, her loyalty was legendary. When Dumbledore's army saw her, they feared her not just for her magic, but for her madness. And that madness was not self-serving. It was channeled entirely toward the service of Voldemort. When Harry tells her in Order of the Phoenix that Voldemort has fled, she screams, "He will rise again. He always does." Her voice full of wrath, her eyes wide with faith. Even in defeat, she preaches his return. Bellatrix Lestrange was not a traitor in waiting. She was not a throne chaser. She was the darkest kind of follower, one who believes absolutely. Her soul belonged to Voldemort long before her body perished. She had nothing else to live for, and she didn't want anything else. To her, his victory was salvation. His existence was her reason. She never wanted to replace him.
She only wanted to kneel.
Number 24. Bellatrix didn't pity Draco Malfoy. When Draco Malfoy stood at the edge of his moral unraveling in Half-Blood Prince, he was more alone than many readers realize. Isolated by fear, burdened with an impossible task, and visibly trembling under the weight of Lord Voldemort's expectations, he did not find solace in the one person who, by blood, could have offered comfort, Bellatrix Lestrange, his aunt. But Bellatrix, who had already surrendered her soul to darkness, did not pity Draco. Her gaze, sharp and cold, measured not pain, but performance. Many fans imagine Bellatrix as harboring some secret compassion for her young nephew, as though behind her maniacal laughter and twisted loyalties there pulsed a hidden maternal instinct. But the text tells another story. When Draco was assigned to assassinate Albus Dumbledore, an impossible task by any standard, it was Narcissa, his mother, who fell to her knees in desperation. It was Narcissa who broke the unspoken rules of Voldemort's circle and ran to Severus Snape, pleading, "You will watch over my son, won't you, Severus?" Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 2. And it was Bellatrix who tried to stop her. From the moment they arrived at Snape's house, Bellatrix made it clear that loyalty to the Dark Lord came before family, even before the welfare of her sister's child. Her eyes burned with contempt as Narcissa wept. She scolded her sister not with concern, but with disdain. "You ought to be proud. If I had sons, I would be glad to give them up to the service of the Dark Lord." Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 2. In that sentence lies the truth of Bellatrix. She viewed Draco's suffering not as tragedy but as tribute. He was a pawn in the grand game, and pawns had no right to falter. There was no softening in her voice when she regarded Draco, no gentle glance, no secret attempt to shield him. Instead, Bellatrix doubted him, vocally, repeatedly. "You're not a Death Eater," she spat at Snape, as though that disqualified him from protecting Draco. But beneath her accusation was something deeper, a disgust that anyone would need protection at all. Bellatrix did not respect weakness, and Draco in her eyes was growing weak. In Deathly Hallows, when the trio was captured and brought to Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix's immediate reaction was not to consult Draco on identifying Harry Potter. Instead, she seized control. She panicked over the sword of Gryffindor, not over her nephew's state of mind. Her first instinct was to torture Hermione, to assert dominance, to silence doubt. Draco, who stood pale and trembling, barely able to identify Harry under swelling curses, was not defended by Bellatrix. She didn't place a protective arm around his shoulder or whisper comfort. She barked orders and snarled threats. Her disregard became most apparent in that very moment. When Lucius pressed Draco to confirm Harry's identity, Bellatrix loomed. Her voice, sharp as a blade, sliced through the tension. "If we are mistaken, if we call the Dark Lord here for nothing, remember what he did to Raoul and Dolohov." Deathly Hallows, Chapter 23. She wasn't protecting Draco from making a mistake. She was threatening him. Fear was her language, and she expected him to learn it fluently. Even in that dark chapter, Narcissa stands as Draco's only true ally. Her eyes searched her son's face not for performance, but for pain. She hovered close, tried to shield him from the gathering storm. Bellatrix, by contrast, was already thunder. She had long since lost the ability to recognize pain as anything but weakness. In fact, she likely despised Draco because he felt fear, because he hesitated, because he cried. To understand Bellatrix's worldview is to understand why she had no room for pity. Her fanaticism was complete. She was Voldemort's most devoted disciple, and she measured everyone, including family, by their utility to him. Draco's hesitations, his terror, his humanity made him disposable. She admired only strength, cruelty, power. That's why she worshipped Voldemort. That's why she called him the Dark Lord with such reverence. That's why when she killed her own cousin Sirius Black, there was not a flicker of regret. In Bellatrix's eyes, Draco's failure to kill Dumbledore was not a tragedy. It was proof. Proof that he didn't deserve the honor he had been given. Proof that he was not worthy of the Malfoy name, let alone the favor of Voldemort. And she had no intention of rescuing him from that shame. The only rescue she might have offered was a final lesson, that fear was not allowed, that hesitation was fatal, that love, even family love, was a burden to be burned away. This is why her presence in the unbreakable vow scene is so significant. She tries to stop Narcissa from sealing Snape into Draco's fate, not out of concern for Snape, but because she believes Draco should stand or fall on his own. "You're not trying to make him feel better, are you?" she snarls. It's not just a question, it's an accusation. In her mind, the worst thing you could do for someone in Voldemort's service was make them feel safe. Safety bred softness, and softness bred failure. Bellatrix had long since renounced softness. She had been imprisoned in Azkaban for over a decade, and it had only sharpened her fanaticism. She emerged more dangerous than ever, eyes wild with unrepentant belief. She didn't just serve Voldemort, she loved him, obsessively, madly. That love eclipsed all other bonds, including those of blood. In Order of the Phoenix, when she shouts, "I killed Sirius Black," she does so with ecstasy. No remorse for murdering her cousin, just glee. So why do fans imagine she felt something for Draco? Because we want to believe even monsters have a heart, because it's comforting to think that somewhere inside that twisted mind there was a shred of humanity left. But Bellatrix had smothered her humanity long ago. She didn't cry when she tortured, she didn't mourn when she killed, and she didn't grieve when Draco stumbled through the collapse of his childhood. Even during the Battle of Hogwarts, Bellatrix showed no concern for Draco's safety. He was inside the castle. She didn't seek him out. She didn't ask after him. Her attention was entirely on Voldemort and the victory he demanded. When Molly Weasley duelled her to the death, Bellatrix wasn't thinking of family. She was thinking of glory. And when she fell, laughing and shrieking, she died as she lived, in a frenzy of fanaticism, not in defense of her kin. Contrast that with Narcissa's quiet moment in the forest, when she lies to Voldemort about Harry's death just to get to her son. "Is Draco alive?" she whispers to Harry. Not, "Is the Dark Lord winning?" Not, "Am I safe?" Just, "Is my child alive?" That is love. That is pity. That is motherhood. Bellatrix could never have done the same. Even Voldemort, for all his cruelty, seemed to see more use in Draco than Bellatrix did. He brought Draco to the Forbidden Forest, made him stand beside the Death Eaters, not as punishment, but as display. But Bellatrix, had she lived, might have urged the Dark Lord to cast Draco aside. Her loyalty was never to family, it was to the cause. Draco was only valuable if he served that cause with fire and blood. Otherwise he was dead weight. There is no scene in the entire series where Bellatrix comforts Draco, no moment where she speaks to him kindly or even privately. Their interactions are functional, cold, hierarchical. Bellatrix speaks about Draco not to him. She doesn't ask how he feels. She demands he act. And when he falters, her silence is not maternal concern. It is contempt. In truth, Bellatrix likely saw Draco as a threat to her status. The Malfoys had once been powerful, but Lucius's disgrace had cast a shadow. Bellatrix, desperate to maintain her place beside Voldemort, could not afford to be associated with failure. And Draco, with his pale face and trembling wand, was failure incarnate. In another life, Bellatrix might have tried to erase that stain. Instead, she ignored it. Or worse, she let it fester. The tragedy of Draco is not just that he was used, it's that he was used by those who should have loved him. His father pushed him into danger to regain political favor. His aunt watched him drown and criticized his strokes. Only his mother reached out a hand, and even she had to do so in secret, hidden from the eyes of those who saw compassion as crime. So no, Bellatrix Lestrange did not pity Draco Malfoy. She pitied only herself when she was denied Voldemort's full attention, when others questioned her loyalty, when she was reminded of the blood ties that once meant something. But Draco was not her concern. His pain was not her burden. His fear was not her failure. In her world, fear was weakness. And weakness did not deserve pity. Number 25. Bellatrix didn't make decisions for Voldemort. Bellatrix Lestrange, born Bellatrix Black, was not a woman of compromise, nor was she a character given to independent thought when it came to her loyalty. From her first moment on the page to her final breath in the Battle of Hogwarts, her every heartbeat was tuned to the will of one man, Lord Voldemort. The notion that Bellatrix ever took matters into her own hands without the Dark Lord's explicit command is not only a misunderstanding of her character, but a dismissal of the single thing that defined her: obsession, not ambition. She was not like Lucius Malfoy, whose loyalty to Voldemort was always shaded by a desire to preserve status. Nor was she like Severus Snape, whose true allegiance was a mystery even to Voldemort himself. Bellatrix did not scheme, did not hesitate, did not seek power for herself. She worshipped. There was no self beneath her devotion, only a vessel waiting to be filled with the will of her master. Her madness was not directionless. It was focused entirely on the fulfillment of the Dark Lord's vision, and she would never act outside of it. In the Department of Mysteries, when she led the Death Eaters to recover the prophecy from Harry Potter, Bellatrix did not act on her own initiative. The plan was orchestrated by Voldemort. Her mission was clear, and she followed it with fervor. Even as others failed, Dolohov was disarmed, the prophecy shattered, and Lucius disgraced. Bellatrix remained fixated not on recovering the orb, but on pleasing her master. You dare speak his name with your unworthy lips. You dare besmirch it with your half-blood tongue. You dare— She shrieked at Harry, her eyes blazing, not with independent purpose, but with protective fury for Voldemort's name. After the failure at the Ministry, she did not disappear into the shadows to plot a correction. She returned to her master and waited for his command. She did not try to find another path, to take revenge, to save face. She endured Voldemort's silence and wrath because she believed that she deserved it. Her loyalty was not shaken, it deepened. Even at Malfoy Manor, when the trio was captured and brought before her, Bellatrix did not take decisive action on her own. Despite the urgency of the situation, Hermione had a sword that Bellatrix believed was supposed to be in her vault. She did not kill without Voldemort's approval. Her interrogation was brutal, cruel beyond words, but it was not rash. She was terrified of what Voldemort would do if something was out of place. "You've been inside my vault?" she shrieked, but she didn't act with finality. She tortured Hermione not for sport, but to get the truth that Voldemort would want. Everything, always, circled back to what he would want. The sword of Gryffindor was a clear trigger, not for rebellion, but for panic. Bellatrix's mind went immediately to Voldemort. What would he say? What would he do if he found the vault had been compromised? It was not a moment of control. It was the clearest moment of subservience. She was paralyzed not by fear of the enemy, but by fear of disappointing him. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Bellatrix accompanies Narcissa to see Severus Snape and begs him to protect Draco, she protests the idea of seeking help from anyone but Voldemort. The Dark Lord has ordered the boy to attempt it. He does not need protection. The Dark Lord does not need to be told that the boy might fail. Her fury is not at the danger Draco faces, but at the idea that someone might question Voldemort's wisdom. Again, she is not a decision-maker. She is a defender of his every choice, even when they risk her own family's destruction. Bellatrix's interactions with Voldemort were never those of an equal. She called him my lord with reverence, with awe, with hunger. Her desire to be near him, to please him, was not rooted in strategy, but in a warped, desperate need. She loved him in a way that was not reciprocated, but it did not matter. She did not need love in return. She needed direction. And Voldemort gave her just enough to sustain that terrible, burning devotion. In the Deathly Hallows, during the final confrontation at Hogwarts, Bellatrix again proved her inability to act independently. When Voldemort ordered her to duel Ginny, Hermione, and Luna, she did not object. She did not suggest a better plan, did not hesitate. She attacked. She came close to killing Ginny Weasley, and in that moment the text says, "Many of the fighters paused to watch as Bellatrix and Molly dueled, because she was that fearsome. But she didn't choose her target. Voldemort gave the order, and she executed." Her duel with Molly Weasley was her final stand, not because she chose to make a brave last decision, but because her arrogance, stoked by Voldemort's confidence in her, made her careless. She underestimated a mother's fury, and in a single flash of light it was over. But she died doing what she believed Voldemort wanted, eliminating threats. Even in moments that might seem independent, Bellatrix's actions reflect submission, not rebellion. When she killed Sirius Black, her cousin, in the Department of Mysteries, it was not because she had a personal vendetta, though she may have relished the opportunity, but because Sirius represented everything Voldemort loathed. "I killed Sirius Black!" she screamed with mad glee. It was not about family, it was about showing Voldemort her usefulness. Her joy came not from the act itself, but from the thought that her master would be pleased. She was no puppet master. She was the puppet who pulled her own strings tight, so Voldemort wouldn't have to. Others sought to manipulate Voldemort, Peter Pettigrew with his cowardly pleas, Barty Crouch Jr. with his eager but misguided fervor. Bellatrix sought only to reflect him. She did not act unless he spoke. She did not think unless he commanded. Voldemort's own words confirm her position. When he speaks to the Death Eaters, he often singles Bellatrix out, not for independent achievement, but for her loyalty. And here we have 6 missing Death Eaters, 3 dead in my service, 1 too cowardly to return, 1 who I believe has left me forever, and 1 who remains my most faithful servant. This was Bellatrix's greatest achievement, not victory, not cunning, not even violence, but faithfulness. Her imprisonment in Azkaban did not break her. Unlike others, she did not plead for mercy, did not denounce Voldemort to lessen her sentence. When he returned, she emerged from the prison unrepentant, unbending, unchanged. "The Dark Lord will rise again, Crouch. Throw us into Azkaban. We will wait," she screamed during her trial. Not a declaration of resistance to the Ministry, but a pledge to Voldemort's name. It is tempting to see her violence, her passion, her intensity as signs of agency, but they are not. Bellatrix was the perfect servant because she gave up the burden of choice. She surrendered her will to Voldemort's entirely. She was not a general with her own strategies. She was the sword he wielded. When he struck, she cut. When he watched, she waited. When he vanished, she suffered in silence, not because she missed freedom, but because she missed him. Narcissa, her sister, was the one who lied to Voldemort. Narcissa was the one who dared to make a decision he would not approve of. But Bellatrix would never do such a thing. Even family meant nothing compared to the purity of her devotion. Had she known Narcissa's lie, she might have killed her own sister. That is how absolute her allegiance was. Her madness, her cruelty, her fame, all these things are noise around the central truth. Bellatrix Lestrange was a fanatic, and fanatics do not question. They believe. She was Voldemort's most terrifying creation, not because she was powerful, but because she was empty of doubt. In the end, it was this lack of self that made her so dangerous, and so doomed. She did not seek glory. She sought approval. She did not desire the Dark Lord's throne. She would have kissed its steps and died there happily if he had asked. Every murder, every act of torture, every scream she pulled from the throat of an enemy was not for her own pleasure, it was for his. Her soul, if it could still be called that, had been given away long ago. Even Dumbledore, who understood the hearts of men better than most, made no attempt to reason with Bellatrix. He knew there was no point. She would not break. She would not bend. She would not see a world where Voldemort could be wrong. Her madness was not chaotic. It was focused, sharpened, like a knife at the feet of her master. In the end, Bellatrix Lestrange was not a woman of action. She was a woman of reaction. Her every movement, every word, every choice was a shadow cast by Voldemort's fire. The idea that she ever acted without his will is not only incorrect, it is the exact opposite of who she was. Her story is not one of rebellion or control. It is a tragedy of total, unquestioning submission. Number 26. Bellatrix was not friends with other Death Eaters. Bellatrix Lestrange was never one to blend into a crowd. Even among the fearsome company of Death Eaters, her presence stood apart, volatile, unpredictable, and utterly consumed by her own fanaticism. While others served the Dark Lord out of fear, ambition, or belief in his ideology, Bellatrix's loyalty was something else entirely. It was worship. And in that obsessive devotion, she found no room for camaraderie or friendship, even with those who stood beside her in battle. To Bellatrix, the other Death Eaters were not comrades. They were background noise, tools, pawns, disposable, forgettable shadows moving around the edges of her master's will. Her disdain wasn't subtle. She showed it in her voice, her actions, her eyes that burned like fire whenever someone dared to speak as if they were her equal. Even Lucius Malfoy, polished and cunning, never earned her respect. In her eyes he faltered, he hesitated, and worst of all, he failed. Her scorn was evident in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince when she taunted Snape and Narcissa at Spinner's End. "You are either with the Dark Lord or against him." Her voice was sharp as a blade, her tone heavy with judgment. Even as Snape tried to reason with her, she was not listening, only testing, probing, challenging. She didn't trust him, not because she was paranoid, but because she couldn't fathom loyalty that wasn't as all-consuming as her own. When the Death Eaters infiltrated the Department of Mysteries in Order of the Phoenix, her behavior toward her companions betrayed her true feelings. She led the charge with manic glee, casting spells with a twisted kind of joy, yet she showed no concern when her fellow Death Eaters were injured or captured. When Rodolphus, her own husband, was struck down, she didn't pause. Her eyes were only on Harry, and more than that, on the possibility of bringing the prophecy to Voldemort. Her own kin were secondary to the Dark Lord's mission. This detachment wasn't just born from arrogance. It stemmed from a dangerous belief that her devotion gave her a higher place. She saw herself as Voldemort's most faithful servant, and perhaps in some ways she was right. After all, she endured Azkaban for him. She came back broken, yet more fervent than ever. In her mind, that suffering elevated her. The rest, those who avoided prison or grovelled for forgiveness, were cowards. She despised them. She made no effort to hide it. During the events at Malfoy Manor in Deathly Hallows, her contempt reached a fever pitch. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione were captured, Bellatrix flew into a rage, not out of fear for the security breach, but because the goblin had been brought there. Take them to the cellar!" she shrieked, furious at the incompetence around her. Narcissa tried to calm her, but Bellatrix wouldn't listen. She didn't take advice, not even from family. Her authority in that moment wasn't questioned by any of the Death Eaters present, not because she had their respect, but because she had their fear. What friendship can exist in fear? The Death Eaters were bound together by a shared allegiance, not by trust. But Bellatrix's brand of loyalty demanded that even that allegiance be suspect unless it mirrored hers completely. She mocked weakness. She disdained failure. She had no patience for politics or subtle maneuvering. When Lucius fell from Voldemort's favor, she relished it. When Snape rose in power, she challenged it. When Draco was given a mission, she offered him no guidance, only derision. "If you are to succeed, you must be ruthless," she hissed. She didn't believe he would. She didn't want him to. Perhaps the clearest example of her isolation lies in how she died. In the Battle of Hogwarts, while many Death Eaters fought in groups covering one another, shielding allies, Bellatrix fought alone. She faced off against Hermione, Ginny, and Luna, laughing wildly, jeering at their attempts to strike her down. Even in death, she didn't seek the support of her comrades. She wanted glory. She wanted to face the best. And when Molly Weasley stepped in, roaring with rage over her daughter, Bellatrix was delighted. She saw it not as a threat, but a challenge, a duel.
"No, not my daughter, you bitch!" Molly screamed, and Bellatrix laughed. That laugh, manic, sharp, wild, wasn't just cruelty, it was loneliness. It was the sound of someone who had abandoned all human connection for the sake of a cause that could never love her back. No Death Eater came to her aid. None tried to shield her. In that moment, she was alone, as she had always been.
Her husband Rodolphus never seemed to matter to her. Unlike other couples in the wizarding world, there was no tenderness, no shared smiles, no sense of partnership. They were married by blood, by duty, not by love. Her heart belonged elsewhere. Voldemort was the center of her world. In Half-Blood Prince, she said it plainly. "The Dark Lord has, in the past, entrusted me with his most precious, his most dangerous secrets." She didn't say us. She didn't include her husband or family, just me. Only me. Other Death Eaters, like Yaxley or Travers, were barely more than insects in her eyes. She might bark orders, she might tolerate their presence, but she never formed bonds, not the way Sirius did with James, or even the way Snape felt something for Lily. Bellatrix's world was a cold, dark monolith, and only one figure stood at its center. Voldemort. She wasn't part of a group. She was the high priestess of a one-wizard cult. Even her treatment of her niece, Tonks, reveals the depth of her warped sense of loyalty. When she found out that Tonks had married a werewolf, she reacted not with sorrow, but with fury. "You shame the noble house of Black," she shrieked during a duel. Family meant nothing if it did not bend to the will of the Dark Lord. Love meant nothing. Blood meant nothing. Only power, only devotion. Snape, too, became a target of her mistrust. Though Voldemort trusted him, Bellatrix never did. In Half-Blood Prince, she demanded answers, accused him of secrecy, questioned his motives. Even as Voldemort's supposed favorite, Snape could not escape her suspicion. She couldn't understand subtlety, couldn't process the idea that loyalty might wear many faces. For her, it had only one, hers. The irony is that Bellatrix could have had allies. Her power, her skill in dueling, her unwavering focus, they could have earned her real loyalty from her peers. But she never sought it. She wanted to stand alone, to shine, not beside others, but in front of them. She wanted to be the one Voldemort called upon, the one he trusted above all, the one who stood nearest when he seized victory. But Voldemort never loved anyone, not even her. She called herself his most faithful servant, but she was never his equal, He never embraced her madness. He used it. He used her. And she let him. Because she didn't care for friends, or for love, or for safety. She cared only for serving. She saw herself not as a person, but as an instrument, sharp, blood-stained, single-minded. Bellatrix's tragedy isn't just that she was evil, it's that she had no one who truly loved her, no one she trusted, no one she could call a friend. Her own family feared her, her allies avoided her, her enemies hated her. And her master? He simply tolerated her because she was useful, until she wasn't. When the dust settled after the Battle of Hogwarts, few mourned her. Her name wasn't whispered in sorrow. There were no tributes, no gravestone marked with flowers. She died as she lived, alone, screaming, laughing, hating. A flame so bright it consumed everything around her, including herself. Bellatrix Lestrange was never part of a brotherhood. She was a weapon, and weapons don't have friends. Number 27. Bellatrix didn't try to hide her identity after escaping. Bellatrix Lestrange did not hide, not for a moment, not after her escape from Azkaban, not after the world trembled at the news of the breakout, and certainly not once she rejoined her Dark Lord. While many believed the fugitives would burrow into the shadows, whispering their hatred behind closed doors, Bellatrix emerged like a flame in the dark, proud, defiant, and unmistakably herself. From the moment she stepped foot back into the world, Bellatrix was not just free, she was triumphant. The ministry might have declared her dangerous, the prophet may have printed warnings with her image, but she didn't flinch. Her long black hair wild as ever, her mad eyes gleaming with joy, she stood at Voldemort's side, at the rebirth of the Death Eater's terror. She was no fugitive hiding in rags. She was a queen of destruction. It was in the Department of Mysteries that her audacity truly revealed itself. She didn't lurk in shadows or strike from afar. She led the charge. You dare speak his name with your unworthy lips. You dare besmirch it with your half-blood tongue. You dare— She shrieked at Harry during their duel, her voice rising in rage. This was not a woman afraid of being seen. She craved the moment, relished it. She wanted to be heard, to be feared, and to remind the world that Bellatrix Lestrange had returned. Even in front of the Order of the Phoenix, she laughed. She duelled Sirius Black, her cousin, without hesitation, without concern for retribution. "Come on, you can do better than that," he taunted. And Bellatrix responded not with fear, but with fury. A flash of green light later, Sirius was gone, and Bellatrix was not fleeing. She laughed. She screamed. She mocked Harry as he chased her. "I killed Sirius Black. You come to avenge him, do you?" No mask, no pretense. Bellatrix was proud of her identity, her crimes, and her loyalty. She did not run. She walked with confidence. She danced with madness. In Malfoy Manor, her arrogance grew. There, surrounded by other Death Eaters, she did not act like a mere servant of the Dark Lord. She ruled the household with an iron hand, interrogating prisoners with delight. When Hermione Granger was captured, Bellatrix did not hesitate. Her brand of cruelty was personal. She carved the word mudblood into the girl's arm, screaming with fury and pleasure, not worrying for a second who might discover her actions. "You filthy little mudblood," she spat over and over. She didn't care that Hermione was a war hero in the making. Bellatrix believed herself untouchable.
Even when the trio was brought to her home and she suspected the sword of Gryffindor to be in their possession, she panicked, but not from fear of exposure. She feared Voldemort's wrath, not the ministry, not public opinion, not justice. She ruled by fear and lived in it too, but never hid. She paced, screamed, threatened, tortured, but she did not run.
The truth is, Bellatrix believed the system had no power. over her anymore. After Azkaban, the only law she recognized was Voldemort's. Her loyalty to him transcended fear of capture. "The Dark Lord will rise again, Crouch. Throw us into Azkaban. We will wait. He will return and reward us beyond any of his followers," she had once screamed in court. She didn't just survive Azkaban, she emerged from it more convinced, more dangerous, more unhinged. In the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, Bellatrix once again charged forward. She set fire to Hagrid's hut, cackled as she flung curses into the darkness, and mocked the defenders of Hogwarts with every spell. She knew her name alone could strike terror into the hearts of many. It was not just power, it was legend. A whispered tale of blood, madness, and devotion. And when the final battle came, Bellatrix was not in hiding. She stood in the heart of the chaos, side by side with the most dangerous of Voldemort's army. She didn't disguise herself or mask her presence. Even as her sister Narcissa worried about her son's safety, Bellatrix seemed oblivious. Her obsession with Voldemort's favor had consumed everything. She wasn't afraid to be caught. She was afraid to disappoint him. Her final duel came with the same fire she always carried. When she fought Molly Weasley, Bellatrix taunted and sneered. "What will happen to your children when I've killed you?" she hissed, laughing. Even then, with the tide turning, she did not surrender or retreat. Her madness was her fuel, her pride her weapon. She believed herself invincible until she wasn't. When Molly struck the fatal blow, Bellatrix's body fell with surprise frozen on her face. That expression told the real story. Bellatrix Lestrange never thought she would fall. She had lived like a legend, and legends do not hide. Her behavior after Azkaban was not the act of someone fearful of recognition. It was a campaign of terror. She didn't want to be forgotten. She wanted the world to remember her name, to speak it in fear. The prophet did. "Bellatrix Lestrange, one of the most dangerous witches alive, remains at large," they wrote. But no one needed reminding. Her trail of chaos was enough. What's more, her confidence was fed by the Ministry's blindness. Cornelius Fudge spent too long denying Voldemort's return, giving Bellatrix free rein. She and her fellow Death Eaters plotted, recruited, and acted, all while the official word was, "Everything is under control." That lull in enforcement only emboldened her further. When the Ministry finally admitted the truth, she had already done her damage. Even her own family couldn't restrain her. Narcissa might have whispered caution, Lucius might have panicked at the cost of Voldemort's wrath, but Bellatrix remained untamed. She called Voldemort "my lord" with reverence and burned with desire to please him, even over reason. She was the only Death Eater who dared to question Snape's loyalty to his face, snarling and challenging him in the shadows of Malfoy Manor. Her devotion made her fearless. Creature, the Black family's old house elf, remembered her. He muttered her name with a mixture of dread and reverence. She was the mad queen of her old household, even as the Black name dwindled. In number 12, Grimmauld Place, her portrait remained, and her history lingered like a curse. Bellatrix's lack of disguise wasn't just arrogance, it was a declaration. "I am Bellatrix Lestrange. I have escaped death. I have killed. I will kill again." There was no need for subtlety when your very name was a weapon. When Harry used the Cruciatus curse on her after Sirius's death, it was Bellatrix who laughed. "Never used an unforgivable curse before, have you, boy? You need to mean them, Potter," she hissed. Even pain was a game to her. Even death was theatre. She played every scene to the hilt. Even within the Death Eaters, she wasn't just another follower, she was their high priestess of pain, their prophetess of cruelty. Voldemort valued her, not just for her power, but for her fanatical loyalty. She believed in him like a worshipper believes in a god, and gods, she believed, destroy worlds. Bellatrix did not merely reappear after Azkaban, she came back like an explosion. She didn't creep, she stormed. She didn't whisper, she screamed. And every word, every spell, every act declared the same truth. She was proud of who she was. The final image of her, falling at the hands of a mother, the most unexpected opponent, was poetic. It wasn't an aura, a chosen one, or a war hero who ended her. It was love that conquered Bellatrix's madness, but even then, her legacy lingered. For years the wizarding world would speak her name in lowered voices, not because she hid, but because she never did. Bellatrix Lestrange wanted to be remembered, and she was, not as a fugitive, not as a criminal, but as a monster who refused to wear a mask. Number 28. She was not the only person Neville feared. Neville Longbottom stood frozen in the corridor of the Department of Mysteries, wand clenched tightly in his trembling hand. Before him loomed the one face he could never forget, not even in sleep, Bellatrix Lestrange. Her wild eyes burned with madness, and her laughter echoed in the cold, magical air like the chime of a cursed bell. But even then, in the middle of chaos and terror, it wasn't just her Neville feared. His terror went deeper. Beyond the woman, beyond the moment. It came from the pain woven into the fabric of his very identity. Bellatrix was only the sharpest tip of a blade that had been slicing into his life since infancy. Most fans of the Harry Potter series remember Neville as the boy who stood up to Voldemort, who pulled the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat and destroyed the final Horcrux. But before that transformation, before the battlefield courage and the rebellion, there was a boy who cowered at shadows, shadows shaped like Death Eaters, twisted by robes and masks, dripping with the memories they carved into his family's fate. Bellatrix may have been the face of that terror, but she was never the only source of it. Neville's parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, were auras, brave and skilled fighters in the First Wizarding War. They were captured after Voldemort's downfall by a group of Death Eaters, including Bellatrix, her husband Rodolphus Lestrange, his brother Rabastan, and Barty Crouch Jr. They weren't seeking revenge, they wanted information. They tortured the Longbottoms with the Cruciatus curse until their minds broke. Bellatrix was the loudest, most infamous of them, but all were complicit in the crime that left Neville without real parents. His fear was never confined to one individual. It was born from the collective cruelty of those who followed Voldemort. It's easy to see why Bellatrix stands out in the narrative. She was a flamboyant villain, almost theatrical in her insanity. Helena Bonham Carter's portrayal in the films emphasized her as Neville's personal nemesis, but the books tell a more nuanced story. When Harry sees Neville's expression in the Department of Mysteries upon recognizing Bellatrix, it's described as a mixture of fear and fury, not blind panic. He wasn't just afraid, he was remembering the screams he never heard but imagined, the institutional silence of his parents, and the vacant stares that replaced love and comfort. In Order of the Phoenix, when Dumbledore's army trains under Harry, Neville is clumsy and often unsure of himself, but something begins to change. The thing about growing up with parents who can't even recognize you, Neville once said in the Room of Requirement, is that you learn to make do. This quiet resilience is central to his arc. He wasn't just preparing to fight Bellatrix, he was learning to stand tall against the ghost of an entire ideology, a culture of magical supremacy that destroyed his family. The Death Eaters as a group were more than killers and torturers. They were the embodiment of everything Neville hated and feared: power without mercy, violence without reason, and a cold, sneering belief in blood purity. It was Lucius Malfoy who tried to manipulate the Ministry from within, ensuring that people like the Longbottoms were never truly avenged. It was Walden McNair, a Death Eater turned executioner, who later tried to kill Buckbeak and enjoyed his work a little too much. Every one of them reminded Neville of what had been stolen from him. When Neville broke into the Department of Mysteries, he wasn't ready. He was terrified, unsure, and undertrained. Bellatrix taunted him. "How's Mummy and Daddy?" she cooed with sadistic pleasure. But Neville didn't run. He tried to hex her, even after his nose was broken and his wand snapped in half. That wasn't just bravery, it was defiance. It was the moment he stopped being a victim and became a fighter. His fear didn't vanish, but it stopped controlling him. After Dumbledore's death, Hogwarts changed. Under the reign of Severus Snape and the Carrows, Alecto and Amicus, two cruel Death Eaters appointed as professors, Neville became one of the most defiant students in the school. He refused to perform the Cruciatus curse on fellow students during dark arts lessons. He organized resistance, he endured torture, he hid in the room of requirement, building a secret haven for those who couldn't escape. The Death Eaters returned not just in name but in presence, and Neville met them with fire in his eyes. There's something quietly heartbreaking in how often Neville's trauma is overlooked. His classmates knew about Harry's scar, Ron's family, Hermione's brilliance. Few knew the full weight Neville carried. Visiting his parents in St. Mungo's was a ritual he performed in silence, without complaint. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry and his friends accidentally see Neville in the hospital, his grandmother says, "It's about time they knew. You should be proud, Neville." And he is, not proud of the tragedy, but proud of surviving it. In the final battle at Hogwarts, Neville faces Bellatrix again. By now, he's no longer the frightened boy she mocked. He leads the charge through the corridors. He refuses Voldemort's offer to join him, standing alone when others hesitate. "I'll join you when hell freezes over," he shouts. It's not just a brave line, it's the culmination of years of fear turned into purpose. He no longer sees a Death Eater and freezes. He sees an enemy and he draws his sword. When Voldemort places the sorting hat on Neville's head and sets it ablaze, it's more than an act of cruelty. It's symbolic, a final attempt to silence the last of Gryffindor's courage. But from the flames, Neville pulls the sword. Then Neville was on his feet, screaming something furiously, and he had the sword of Gryffindor in his hands. Deathly Hallows. He beheads Nagini, the last Horcrux, severing Voldemort's immortality. The terrified child is gone. In his place stands a warrior. Yet, even in that moment, Neville doesn't act out of revenge. He doesn't hunt Bellatrix like Harry hunts Voldemort. When she dies at the hands of Molly Weasley, Neville doesn't cheer. His arc wasn't about vengeance, it was about reclaiming power, not over Bellatrix, but over the fear she represented. His victory wasn't in her death, but in the fact that she no longer defined him. What makes Neville's journey so powerful is that he never sought glory. He didn't grow stronger to prove anything to others. He simply refused to be broken. His deepest fear wasn't of pain or death. It was that he would never live up to the legacy of his parents, that he would always be the forgettable boy who couldn't remember a simple spell. But Dumbledore knew better. "It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies," he once said, "but just as much to stand up to our friends." Neville had done both. In a way, the Death Eaters were like shadows, each one a distorted echo of the past. Some, like Bellatrix, revelled in cruelty. Others, like Snape, lived in the grey, but for Neville they all formed a single monstrous silhouette, the force that ruined his childhood. Defeating them wasn't about wand work, it was about learning that he could still grow, still love, still lead.